My name is Rick Moore, and I'm the publisher of Whitecap Publications, and today I'm interviewing Eric DeCarlo, an author of ours who's really. How are you, Eric?
Oh, I'm good.
Good, good. Listen,
I'm always good.
I'd like to start out our question and answer section today on what motivates you to write.
Oh, okay. That's a good deep philosophical dive right there. The question, how I usually answer that one is I write because I don't know how to stop. But that's really just a smart aleck.
Yep.
You know, that's just a comeback, really. That's not exactly an answer. Although there is some truth to that. I'm always motivated to write rather than understanding the reasons. It's just like that switch is always on. Like
Right.
everything I look at through the prism of, okay, how can I take that thing that I just looked at in the real world and turn it into a story? That's kind of like always where my mind is. You're looking for titles. You're looking for, especially if you're writing science fiction. It's like, well, what is that thing right there in front of me that I could extrapolate into the future?
Right.
You know, can I get my hand on that, and can I do something with that? Underneath that, the actual motivation is probably just a desire to communicate with the world. I really don't have any other remarkable skills in this life. I can do menial tasks and jobs and whatnot as well as the next person. Probably if I had to pick a profession that I could that I actually had some gumption in, I used to wait tables down in New Orleans, and I was really good at that. That was actually pretty fun. And I could have done that for the rest of my life, but that's not exactly where my heart is. But writing, it's how I enter the world. It's how I communicate what I've got to say in the best possible way, rather than just talking to one person about, oh, these are the things I believe and this is how I see the world. If I can put those ideas into entertaining, first and foremost, entertaining form, so that somebody else might be motivated to read to the end of the story, then I feel like I've had an interchange with the world. I've given the world something, and if I can get some feedback from them, like in the form of an acceptance from an editor, then I've gotten something back, and it's like, well, I've done something there.
Right.
And I mean, stories and words are very ethereal.
Do you find writing addictive? In an odd sense, I mean.
Yeah, but addiction always strikes me as self-destructive. Like, some people will say, well, I'm addicted to exercise and that's why I'm in such good shape. But to me, it's like, well, do you really want to be in the position where you have no choice whatsoever but to go out and jog 5 miles at 6 in the morning? Is that really where you want to be? It's like, yeah. There's definitely an allure to writing that is like nothing else.
You feel the draw. Is that correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. When you write a good story, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not just, well, for me anyway, this is probably one of my failings, is it can't just be me. I can't just write something and say, oh my God, that's so good. It has to pass the test. And I don't just mean, oh, I'm going to show this to a loved one, and of course they're going to like it. I need to send this out cold to somebody who has no emotional stake in me. Even if it's an editor I've worked with and who likes my stuff, right, you're still getting a professional feedback. And if I can get that acceptance from an outside source, then it validates everything I've done. And the story that I thought was really good, then it becomes really good, which, like I said, that's a hard proposition to live with every single day.
A sense of validation when a story is accepted.
Yeah, absolutely. That way I know I'm not fooling myself. I know I'm not, oh, well, I wrote this thing and I thought it was so good. And it's like, well, you wrote it and you thought it was good, because it's satisfying something in you, just you personally. So maybe it's not as good as you think it is. So when you can get somebody, when somebody is willing to give you money, which is a great, that's a great indicator. It's like, here, we're going to give you cash for this thing that you did.
Yep.
Then you know that you've done something that somebody is willing to take a gamble on, and that's a real success. And it's a hard proposition to face every single day, but it's just that's how the game is. I could never be one of those, writers who just sits in the cabin off by themselves and lets the manuscripts pile up and says,
Right.
Oh, I'm such a good writer. And it's like, are you? Are you really? What's that based on? So this way I'm giving myself over into, a really indifferent arena with editors and, the magazines. I'm going to submit this and, maybe I can get this past the guard, but, and if they don't like it, then I got to send it to the next one. And if it's failure after failure,
Well,
it'll start to eat away at you.
the reason I ask is
Yes.
writing is a notoriously difficult life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I wonder what motivated you to write, and if you're validated or not validated by acceptance.
Well, what kicked me off had to be, and we talked about this before, was my father's notions of wanting to be a writer, and he really infused that enthusiasm into me. Wasn't trying to do it. Wasn't saying, oh, you're going to follow in my footsteps. It was just, I could see that this was really the one thing in his life that really touched him the deepest. And of all the older people around me when I was growing up, it was like, even though he's not a success at this, he's onto something. This would be interesting to pursue. And so that seeded the idea in my mind. And as I started to put, just the worst possible stories together as a kid, just blathering verbiage. Even then I was like, oh, I kind of feel the spark, and I read things and I start to be able to perceive of how other writers are doing it. And I thought, boy, that would be an interesting avenue. What if I did that? That would be just, books were just magical to me when I was a kid. I would just like the covers and like all this print all in one place. And there's this whole contained world. And I was like, as I got older, it's like, man, I want to do that. But how do you do that? And the thing is you have to keep yourself motivated by keeping your eye on the prize, and the prize at that point is way out there. It's way out ahead of you. It is far in the distance. It's over the horizon. You can only see the faint glow of it. But if you want it badly enough, then you keep going for it, and you will inevitably get better. You might not get good enough to pass any of the important thresholds, but you will become better.
The reason I ask all this is it
Yes.
leads me to an important topic. We're going to publish the book, The Cold.
Oh, yes.
That's really dear to your heart, I understand.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And it's got an unusual story structure.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain why? Why you felt it necessary to create it that way?
I thought it was, and I had definite reasons for the way I put it together. Let me just recap what the book is about real quick here. The Cold is a speculative fiction novel that takes place 20 years after, without explanation and all at once, human beings have stopped being born with emotions. So you've got this new society that's forming where you have people who are old, that is 20 and older, and they feel emotions just like all of us do. And then you have the younger generation that's come up behind them from 0 to 20. These are people who are walking around without any emotional structure in them whatsoever. They look like us, they speak, they have the same kind of intelligence, but they have absolutely no emotions about them. And it's this incredibly eerie apocalypse because there's no explanation for it. Nobody, did God just throw a switch one day and say, oh, we're going to stop having you born with emotions, and all you older people are going to have to watch this younger generation come up behind you, and these, sinister, you can't figure them out. How do you deal with somebody who has no?
That's really a fascinating concept, by the way.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the recap. So, that was the material I was going to work with, and I thought about writing it for a long time because I published a short story that used the same theme, and it was like I always had it in mind. I'm going to expand that into a book one day, and then I started to think about it, and then I started to really think about it. But I pondered it for a long time. And it's like, well, how would I go about telling this story? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to tell that idea from as many angles as I possibly could. I wanted to examine, how would a cold react the first time they heard music, or that they had a song explained to them? Would it mean anything to them? What would the olds who have emotions, how would they feel about the younger generation? What would be the initial reaction to these people? And of course, it would be violent. There would be genocidal efforts to wipe these creatures out. But no matter what you do, colds will still be born. Two olds having a baby will have a cold child. An old and a cold having a baby, same thing. Two colds having children. They're all going to be cold from here on out. That's all you're ever going to
All
get.
children are born cold, right?
Yeah, absolutely, all of them. And in the story, it took a little while for them to figure out, oh, what's wrong with these babies? And then you get this gut drop realization that, oh my God, these children aren't really human in the sense that we think of human being, even though physiologically they are exactly like us. So that's a big meaty idea, and I wanted to come at every angle from it. So the idea was, with the structure, I have a basic through line of the main character, who is a 40-year-old old who is just kind of sleepwalking through his life and sort of resigned to the idea that he and his kind are going to go extinct eventually. And this strange replacements are coming up behind them. And he's just going through the motions at this point.
That has to be an odd feeling.
Oh yeah, well,
Like you're the last of your kind.
Yeah, well, it's really almost worse than like a Last Man on Earth story where, everybody's died, or like a zombie story where, well, everybody's going to be a flesh-eating zombie. It's like, well, okay, it's just the idea that these people are so similar, but they have the main ingredient of humanity is completely absent from them. So I would have this story where the old 40-year-old executive guy is going to manufacture a relationship with a cold, a 20-year-old cold. And that's what the story's about. And it drives straight through the thing. But I wanted to tell all the little side bits as I went. And when I started actually writing the thing, I started referring to these in my head as the interstitial chapters. These ones that are just these asides. Like I have a bit where I talk about who was the last person born with emotions, who was the very last one, and they've figured out who it was, and it was this, this girl in the Balkans or something like that, and they make her into the queen of. She's just the queen of humanity now. They install her they build a palace for her, and she receives envoys, and she's very gracious, and she's the last of the old. She's the last one that's ever going to be born, so she's kind of revered. And I lifted that from the novel Children of Men, where you've got the movie, I can't remember how the book opens, but the movie opens with the final person being born on Earth, and everybody else is sterile, so there's not going to be any more children. There's the final child, and the final child is grown up, and he's been killed in a street brawl or something like that. And I thought, oh, hey, that's a good idea. Who's going to be the last one? Yeah. So there's stuff like that. I have chapters that just kind of come in from the side, and like the guy imagines, what would my life have been like if I'd been born in other cities? And then I just go down the list of like, okay, New York, New Orleans. I used to live there, so I can write about that. And that gave me a chance to show how societies in other cities dealt with the horrible phenomenon of the colds among them. And it's like, well, what would his life have been like this way? And then I had a chapter where I'm imagining who's the last of the old. What is that going to be like? And I did this really eerie, it chilled me out when I wrote it. The idea of, okay, here's the final old, and they're dying in their room. The colds own the planet now, and it's this person who's got their little artifacts around them and like a shawl or a blanket, and they're fading out, and that's going to be it for the human race. It's all over. And I went with stuff like that from the sides. And so when I was doing that, I would jump out of, I would change the tense. I would go from present to past. I would go from first person to third. Mostly
Right.
the book is told first person from the executive's point of view in the present tense, and I like it. It gives it some verve. But then I could switch it up and take that same character and drop him into the third person and go at a remove. So kind of getting away from his own
Perspective.
yeah, and the ways he might be fooling himself. Like he talks at one point about, oh, I'm having this relationship with a 20-year-old, and I'm only 40, so my libido hasn't waned at all. And then later I can call him out on that. It's like, and yeah, people, middle-aged guys just say
I've got
stuff
to
like
ask
that.
you, is
Yes.
his only attraction to the 20-year-old cold physical lust?
That's the main motivator. At least that's the one on the surface, because that's the easiest one to grasp. She's a bicycle messenger in downtown San Francisco, where the main character lives, and he sees her when he's out on his lunch breaks. He sees her repeatedly, and he picks her out. And he's like, "Oh, she's so attractive, and she's so she's fit and she's young, and there's nobody in his life like that anymore." But underneath that, he's also wondering, what are the colds really like? Can I actually get to know them before me and my kind are done on this world? Can I figure out what makes her tick? So when they start the relationship and he brings her into his home for the month that he's arranged and paid for, like a creep, paid for to have this relationship with her, he's testing her in ways. He's giving her like clothing choices and trying to figure out how she determines things. What
Do you think that he sees a chance to inculcate emotions into her?
He's going to see if he can. I don't know that he has any expectation that he'll be able to do that. But he's curious if he can provoke, if not emotions, then like the ghosts of emotions. Just the
Right.
Will she react in the same way if she had feelings to a particular situation, even though she doesn't have feelings? Are they all just pure logic, these creatures? Because they're not smarter than humans. They're just as smart as humans. But
Right.
they work from a basis of how can I survive the moment?
Well, their mind is not limited by emotions. And at the same time, their mind is not enabled by emotions.
Yeah. So it's almost like an alien encounter where they're trying to figure out he's trying to figure out a common language with her. But there were some real surprises in her behaviors, and he's like, "Oh my God, she uses contractions. She says yeah instead of yes," and he kind of calls himself on it. This is from years of watching science fiction. All the robots, speak in androidese, and they say, yeah, they all talk like Data, from Star Trek. So he's surprised by some of the mechanics of her day-to-day interactions with the world, and when she's interacting directly with him, he's always observing. I mean, he's hot for her because he's a 40-year-old and she's a hot 20-year-old, so there's that. But he's also trying to see if in himself he can awaken emotions that have gone dormant.
Right.
Like I said, he's just kind of sleepwalking through his life now. Doesn't have any important relationships anymore. He's got a steady job that means nothing to him, but it pays the rent, so that's fine. Right. So he can just kind of coast until the end of his life. But he's like, in his younger days, he felt like he never had a full grasp of his own emotions before the cult phenomenon even existed. So it's like, did I have a little tinge of this before it was hip and everybody became a cult? So he's wondering if he can awaken that in himself. And what would be the biggest challenge? The biggest challenge would be, can I love somebody who cannot possibly love me back?
Do you see a reflection of the colds in him? He's struggling with it?
Yeah, that's kind of how he sees it. And he feels a certain amount of lingering guilt. Like in his childhood, I have a scene where he's dealing with his parents, and his mother says to him at some point, it's hard to love somebody who won't love you back, Kyle. That's his name. And that kind of sticks with him.
Like,
right? Yeah, because, he knows in his heart, no, I really do love my mother, but I just don't express it in quite this gregarious way that maybe, she or other people are looking for. He's a little reserved, and he's kind of at a remove. So
that makes him feel that he could be a precursor to the Coles, right?
Yeah, but not in a realistic way. He's not thinking,
no.
Oh, this is whatever happened. I was, the forerunner. It's something in his mind. It's like, I kind of understand these people to an extent. So he sees. Right. Was it?
Right.
Yeah. So he feels a certain twisted kinship with the cold, which was fun to play with. And again, I could come at it from different angles. I could step out of his head and look at it from a more objective point of view, and then I could drop right back into his skull, into the meat of the whole thing. So it's almost prismatic, where you're looking at the basic story, and then it's just surrounded, like I said, by these interstitial chapters, which are usually much shorter than the main narrative. But it was so much fun to pick at it from all the sides, because anything that occurred to me, it's like, man, I can write a chapter about that. Any little bit of the phenomenon that I want to look at, it's like, man, I can just put it under the microscope, and we can all have a good look at it.
All right, you've explained why you chose the story structure that you did, right? Mm-hmm. Just say are your literary influences in this matter.
Oh yeah, that's a perfect through line. That's a perfect question for where this goes. Before I sat down to start the book, and like I said, I thought about it for a couple of years, and then I, kind of psyched myself up to it. And it's like, okay, we're gonna tackle this in a month or two. So I went and I read a couple of my favorite books, but one book in particular. Robert Silverberg is probably my favorite author in the world. He did just amazing stuff. And before I started writing, I read like his seminal deep dive introspective novel, which is called Dying Inside. I think it's from 1971 or 72.
Really?
Yeah, it's a simple premise, which ultimately The Cold is a very simple premise too. But in Dying Inside, you've got a character who is a mind reader, and he's getting into middle age, and he's starting to lose his power. And that's the whole story. That's it. That's all that happens in the thing.
Really?
And over the course of the book, he examines that phenomenon from every possible angle. He goes back into the past, and it's like, well, what was it like when he started having this? What was it like when later on, when it started to fade? What mess did he make of his life because he had this ability? And Silverberg just, it's an amazing piece of work. It's a deep dive. It's very introspective. You get an intimacy with this character that is like nothing else.
Wow.
It's my favorite book in the world. I actually met Silverberg at one time, and I said, dude, Dying Inside is my favorite book.
Met him.
And yeah, I met him at a convention. We were going to see his panel, and there he was wandering the hallways because he couldn't find the room. And I was like, Mr. Silverberg, we're going to your panel, come. And on the way, I actually talked to him. It was a nice conversation. It was an actual meaningful encounter, but I got to tell him, that book is my favorite book in the world. And he said, what's that?
how old was he?
Oh, this was back in like 2001, I think. It was at Dragon Con back in the day. It was like a couple of weeks before 9/11 happened. That's kind of how I know
Wow.
the year. Yeah. But I got to tell him, this was my favorite book, and he was like, "Yeah, oh yeah, well, I bet you wish you wrote it." Like, what I should have said to him, of course, was, "I bet it was more fun to read than it was to write." It was like, it must have been like writing a suicide note
Oh
for
my God.
3 months. It's so intense and so personal and so intimate, and
Right.
it's harrowing and grueling because all you're doing is watching this main character lose the one gift that he kind of squandered over his lifetime, and now he's not going to have it anymore. And and Silverberg did the thing where he jumps the tense and he moves the viewpoint, and it reads like poetry. It's just gorgeous, really literary prose. Like, you can have paragraphs that last an entire page, and you just want to pick apart every word because they're so gorgeous. So he's a big influence on me.
Right.
And I deliberately did that before I started writing The Cold, because I was like, well, this is kind of the frequency I want to tune to.
Right.
But like earlier influences than that were Ray Bradbury of kind of all people, because my stuff does not resemble his at all. But when I was like in grade school and reading science fiction, there were some of his sort of juvenile short fiction collections, like S is for Space and R is for Rocket. And they were these cute little, like I said, very juvenile 1950s.
My favorite
simple
book is Something Wicked This Way Comes. I love that.
Oh, yeah, that's a terrific book. That's the best film adaptation you're ever going to get from any of his work. It's just, that movie is brilliant. But with Bradbury, he kind of took me from those early stories that were very simple and easy to digest and, made perfect sense to a 10-year-old, to later collections. Like there's one called Long After Midnight, which is very sophisticated and was very adult. And I read it before I could entirely grasp everything that was going on. But I could see that, his style has changed. He's evolved. And I could appreciate that he was going to greater depths and he was expecting more of the reader. And, these were adult themes, and they were, they would linger in the mind after. Because for me, kind of being too young to read this particular stuff, it was like, well, I need to, what is he talking about here? How do I decode this? Like there's the title story in the thing is about 3 ambulance drivers, and they go out and they've gotten a call. They're going to retrieve a body of a suicide, and it's been called in anonymously. And it's a woman who's hung herself out on a cliffside. And they go and they get the body, and it's this dark, moody thing. And they're talking about the 3 guys. 2 of them are veterans, and one is brand new to this business. And they're talking about what the job is and what it does to you. And at some point, they realize that the woman they have picked up, the dead body, it's not a woman. It is, in the parlance of the time, it's a cross-dressing man. And the final words of it, and it doesn't even say it explicitly. It's just kind of hinted at. And the final lines of the thing are, do we feel better about this now, about the suicide, or do we feel worse? And that just lingered in me. And it took me,
a long time to digest it, right?
And years to figure out what was actually going on in the story. And it was just the impact of that was like, boy, I'm going from this guy who I used to read about just rocket ships and, going to space and adventures and bug-eyed monsters.
I loved of his was The Illustrated Man, too.
Oh, yeah. They filmed that one as well. That was with Rod Steiger.
Junior concept, but it's a great concept.
Yeah, he had something. So he, without like directly influencing me, because I never tried to rip him off and never really worked in his pastures, he like excited me to
write,
to get better at what you can do. You can start out as one thing and you can move into something more sophisticated. And it was like,
right.
I was very drawn to the idea of writing oh, grown up stuff. And, what do adults, what are they like, as a teenager trying to figure out these,
Right.
big people around me, and why are they so complex, and why are they so messed up, and I wanted to figure that out. So without ripping off Bradbury in any way, he kind of shone a light onto the path. But almost anything that I read, and even still read to an extent, influences me. It's like, because I'm decoding everything as I read it. It's like, okay, how did they do this? And now I can figure out how they do this. When I was a kid, and I would read, like, Stephen King was one of my favorite authors. It was stuff that was just beguiling, because it was like, how is he doing this? I'd read these stories over and over again. I was like,
well, you think that would take the mystery out of it, the love of reading, but it enhances it. It really does.
For sure. I said one time to, this is another famous people I've met, Elizabeth Moon, the author, terrific author. And I said to her, I don't read for pleasure anymore. And she got thoughtful, because she's smart. And she said, I don't quite agree with that. I would say that I don't read innocently. And it's like, oh, that's exactly it. You don't read innocently. You're not, I cannot step back out of the profession and just be a fan. I can appreciate what I'm doing, but while I'm loving what I'm doing and I'm being moved to tears by it or whatever, I'm also going, okay, how do you do that? Okay, let's see the blueprint. Okay, he did this right here. Oh, I'm on to you.
All right. Now, look, our time is up for today.
Okay.
But I'd like to ask you to come back next Saturday.
Oh, yeah, no. We can do this till the end of time if you want.
That would be great, because I'd love to talk to you further.
Yeah, this has been a blast, man.
All right.
This breaks up my week lovely.
All right, I appreciate it. And the book that's coming out from Whitecap Publications is called The Cold. It's really great. You've got to read it. All right.
Thank you.
Till next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.